It began as one of the most daring prison escapes in American history. A cold December morning in South Texas, 7 inmates slipping past steel gates and gun towers, vanishing into the wind. Among them was Joseph Christopher Garcia, a man serving a 50-year sentence for murder, who believed freedom was his only redemption. But what followed wasn't freedom, it was chaos, blood, and tragedy. Just 11 days later, on Christmas Eve, their desperate bid for survival turned deadly when Irving police officer Aubrey Hawkins, a young husband and father, responded to a silent alarm at a sporting goods store. Within seconds he was ambushed, shot multiple times, and run over as the fugitives fled. The nation erupted. A manhunt like no other swept across Texas and beyond. When the dust settled, 6 were captured, 1 dead by his own hand, and Garcia found himself facing a new sentence: death. He maintained he never fired a shot, yet under Texas law his fate was sealed. Nearly 18 years later, in a small chamber in Huntsville, he took his final breath. To understand the full scope of this story, we have to go back to where it all began. But first, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell icon so you won't miss our next haunting true crime episode. Born on October 6, 1971 in San Antonio, Texas, Joseph Christopher Garcia grew up in a world where survival often outweighed morality. Those who knew him as a child described a boy with intelligence and potential, yet burdened by an environment filled with instability, street influence, and fractured family ties. As a teenager, he drifted toward the wrong crowd, the streets of San Antonio offering the kind of brotherhood he couldn't find at home. What began as petty theft soon escalated into violence, and by his early 20s, Garcia was living the hard life of a man hardened by crime, not yet realizing the irreversible path he was on. In 1996, Garcia's life took a devastating turn when he was convicted of murder in Bexar County after a deadly altercation that left 1 man dead. The court sentenced him to 50 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, sealing his fate behind concrete walls and razor wire. Inside, Garcia developed a reputation as both intelligent and calculating, a man who read legal books and dreamed of freedom. But within the prison system, freedom was a fantasy, and Joseph's longing for redemption soon turned into a plan. What no one knew was that this quiet, reserved inmate would soon become part of one of the most shocking prison escapes in Texas history. By the year 2000, Joseph Christopher Garcia had already spent 4 long years inside the John B. Connally Unit, a massive maximum security prison near Kennedy, Texas. The facility was built like a fortress, endless coils of razor wire, steel gates, and concrete walls rising against the dry South Texas horizon. It was home to some of the most dangerous inmates in the state. To the outside world, escape was impossible. But inside, behind the thick smell of metal and sweat, a quiet rebellion was forming. Garcia, known among inmates for his sharp mind and calm demeanor, had crossed paths with 6 others, men with nothing left to lose. George Rivas, a former military-trained ringleader with charisma and precision, was serving life for armed robbery and kidnapping. Patrick Murphy, a convicted sex offender, became the radio man and communicator. Randy Halprin, the youngest of the group, carried both rage and intellect. Larry Harper, a tough and volatile inmate, was the enforcer. Donald Newberry, serving 99 years for aggravated robbery, was the muscle with street smarts. Michael Rodriguez, once a respected family man turned criminal after tragedy, brought discipline. And then there was Joseph Garcia, the quiet strategist, an observer who absorbed every detail of the prison's routine. Over months, the 7 studied every weakness: guard shifts, blind spots, tool rooms, and the rhythm of daily operations. They stole tools from the prison's maintenance area, hid them in hollow walls and ceiling tiles, and even used makeshift radios to coordinate. Every day brought a new rehearsal: whispered conversations through vents, coded notes passed under doors, silent nods in the chow line. On December 13, 2000, their plan unfolded with surgical precision. Disguised as maintenance workers, they infiltrated the prison's power plant area, overpowering civilian employees one by one. They used duct tape and cords to restrain them, taking their clothes, identification, and even weapons. Each man now wore the uniform of a prison worker, an image that would grant them false authority at every security gate they approached. As alarms buzzed faintly in the distance, the group loaded stolen firearms, ammunition, and a cache of tools into a prison truck. With Rivas behind the wheel and Garcia double-checking each gate's timing, they drove through multiple layers of locked security, waving to unsuspecting guards as they passed. It was almost surreal: 7 convicted felons driving out of a maximum security facility in broad daylight. Once outside the perimeter, they ditched the truck and disappeared into the Texas brush. Hours later, when the first head count revealed the missing men, the Connally Unit went into lockdown, but by then the Texas 7 were already gone. Once free from the towering walls of the Connally Unit, the 7 fugitives disappeared into the vast expanse of Texas, moving like shadows across highways and backroads. For the first time in years, Joseph Garcia felt the air of freedom, cold, sharp, and fleeting. But that freedom came with a price. They were now the most wanted men in America, hunted by local, state, and federal law enforcement. Their first days were marked by chaos and survival. They hijacked vehicles, robbed stores, and stole cash, clothing, and weapons, anything that could buy them another sunrise outside a cell. Garcia, ever the quiet thinker, helped the group stay disciplined. George Rivas, their leader, enforced military-like precision, ensuring each move was planned down to the minute. They communicated using stolen police scanners, always one step ahead of the law. The men scattered temporarily, blending into small Texas towns. Some stayed in motels under fake names. Others camped in wooded areas. They changed their appearances, shaving heads, growing beards, altering their clothes. But the longer they stayed free, the more desperate their actions became. They needed money and guns to keep going. Law enforcement across Texas was on edge. Roadblocks appeared overnight. The media dubbed them the Texas 7, splashing their faces across newspapers and television screens. The governor issued an urgent statewide alert, and the Texas Rangers joined the manhunt. Citizens were told to lock their doors. Garcia and the others knew it was only a matter of time before their freedom ran out. They decided they couldn't keep running forever. They needed resources, and fast. That's when George Rivas proposed one final high-risk job. One that would give them cash, firepower, and supplies to disappear for good. None of them knew that this decision would lead to bloodshed, a hero's death, and the end of their story. It was Christmas Eve, December 24, 2000, and while families across Texas gathered around trees and fireplaces, the Texas 7 were preparing for another kind of night, one fueled by desperation and greed. Their target was the Oshman Sporting Goods store in Irving, Texas, a busy retail outlet that carried firearms, ammunition, and cash, everything they needed to continue their escape. That evening, as the last customers left, the group quietly entered the store, subduing the employees and forcing them to the ground. They moved swiftly and methodically, just as they had practiced, gathering handguns, rifles, and money. Dressed in stolen uniforms, they used walkie-talkies to coordinate. Inside, the air was thick with fear and tension. Hostages lay bound and trembling as the fugitives filled duffel bags with weapons. Meanwhile, a silent alarm was triggered. Officer Aubrey Hawkins, a 29-year-old Irving police officer, husband and father of a 9-year-old son, was nearby when the call came through. Known for his courage and dedication, Hawkins responded immediately, pulling into the parking lot alone, unaware of the deadly trap awaiting him. As Hawkins stepped out of his patrol car, gunfire erupted. The group opened fire in a coordinated ambush. In the chaos, Officer Hawkins was hit 11 times, his patrol car riddled with bullets. The attack was brutal and swift. As the men fled in stolen vehicles, one of them drove over Hawkins' body, ensuring no pursuit. The scene they left behind was carnage, shattered glass, bullet casings, and the still body of a young officer who had given everything in the line of duty. The murder of Officer Aubrey Hawkins sent shockwaves through Texas and the nation. Within hours, every major news outlet was broadcasting the manhunt live. The Texas 7 were no longer just escaped convicts, they were now cop killers. For Joseph Garcia, the gravity of their actions began to sink in. He would later claim he never fired a weapon, but it no longer mattered. The law would see them all as equally guilty. From that moment forward, their days of freedom were numbered, and the full force of justice was closing in. In the days following the brutal murder of Officer Aubrey Hawkins, the state of Texas erupted into one of the largest and most intense manhunts in modern American history. Every law enforcement agency, from local police departments to the Texas Rangers, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshals Service, joined forces, working around the clock to capture the 7 fugitives now branded across every television screen as the Texas 7. Their mugshots filled news bulletins, post offices, and highway billboards. Talk shows analyzed their escape, crime experts debated their coordination, and the public, gripped by fear and fascination, waited for the moment justice would strike. The nation wanted answers, and retribution. Meanwhile, Joseph Garcia and his 6 partners were hundreds of miles away, moving carefully through the Midwest. After several weeks on the run, they crossed into Colorado, settling in a remote recreational vehicle park in Woodland Park, a quiet mountain town just outside Colorado Springs. There, they adopted new identities, posing as Christian missionaries under the group name Faithful Servants of Christ. They wore matching jackets with religious logos, attended local church services, and blended into the community, earning trust from neighbors who saw them as polite and devout. They used fake identification cards, paid cash, and lived in a small motorhome, cold, cramped, but safe enough to breathe freely again. But even in the thin mountain air, tension followed them. Some wanted to move on, others wanted to stay hidden. George Rivas, their leader, knew time was against them. The faces of the Texas Seven were now part of a nationwide campaign, and a $500,000 reward was being offered for information leading to their capture. That breakthrough came on January 22, 2001, when a viewer of America's Most Wanted recognized the fugitives and immediately called authorities. Within hours, SWAT teams, FBI agents, and local Colorado police surrounded the RV park. The mountain silence broke into chaos, sirens, spotlights, and orders echoing through the night. Inside, panic spread. Larry Harper, realizing there was no escape, turned a gun on himself before officers could break in. The others, George Rivas, Joseph Garcia, Michael Rodriguez, Donald Newberry, Patrick Murphy, and Randy Halprin, surrendered after a tense standoff. Cold wind whipped through the trees as they were let out, one by one, shackled and silent. It was over. The long weeks of fear, the endless chase, the chaos that began in a South Texas prison yard had finally come to an end in the quiet woods of Colorado. For law enforcement, it was a moment of triumph. But for the families of Officer Hawkins and the people of Texas, it was a somber reminder of a life lost and justice still to come. As Joseph Garcia sat in the back of the police van, hands bound, staring into the snowy darkness, he knew that the freedom he'd risked everything for had lasted only 42 days. Ahead of him waited the long road back to Texas, and the death sentence that would one day claim his life. After their dramatic capture in Colorado, the Texas Seven were transported back to Texas under the highest security possible, handcuffed, shackled, and escorted by heavily armed officers. Their arrival marked the beginning of a long legal reckoning. Each surviving member faced capital murder charges for the killing of Officer Aubrey Hawkins, the 29-year-old Irving police officer slain on Christmas Eve 2000. The state of Texas vowed to ensure that justice would be swift and unrelenting. In courtrooms filled with grief, anger, and media attention, prosecutors meticulously reconstructed the events of that fatal night. They argued that the group's decision to rob Oshman Sporting Goods was a coordinated and premeditated act, one that directly led to the violent death of a police officer performing his duty. Even though not every member had pulled the trigger, the law was clear. Under Texas's law of parties, anyone who willingly participates in a felony that results in the death of another person can be held equally responsible for murder. Joseph Christopher Garcia, now back behind bars, faced this reality head-on. He maintained that he never fired his weapon, insisting that his role in the robbery did not involve violence. But prosecutors countered that Garcia was a willing and active participant, helping plan the heist, arming himself, and assisting in the group's escape afterward. His presence, they argued, was proof of shared intent. The jury agreed. In 2002, after a tense and emotional trial in Dallas County, Garcia was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. As the judge read the verdict, Garcia sat expressionless, his eyes fixed ahead. For the family of Officer Hawkins, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but no punishment could bring their son, husband, and father back. Over the following years, Garcia's legal team filed multiple appeals, challenging the fairness of his trial and the application of the law of parties in death penalty cases. They argued that Garcia had not personally taken a life and that executing him was disproportionate to his role. Yet each appeal, from state courts to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and eventually the U.S. Supreme Court, was denied. The courts upheld his conviction, affirming that under Texas law, Garcia's actions made him equally culpable for Officer Hawkins' death. As the years passed, Garcia's name remained tied to one of the most infamous crimes in Texas history. Behind the razor wire of Connally Unit, he spent long, quiet years in solitary confinement, reading, writing letters, and reflecting on how one desperate act had sealed his fate. His execution date would be set and delayed several times, but the outcome was never truly in doubt. For more than 16 years, Joseph Christopher Garcia lived in the shadow of death at the Allen B. Connally Unit in Livingston, Texas, home to the state's most dangerous and isolated inmates. The Connally Unit, known for its solitary confinement conditions, is a place where time feels frozen. Each inmate is locked alone for 23 hours a day in a 6 by 9 foot concrete cell, their only human contact coming from brief interactions with guards or through thick plexiglass during visits. For Garcia, this became his world, an unending cycle of confinement, reflection, and survival. Despite the isolation, Garcia continued to maintain that he never fired a weapon and never intended for anyone to die during the Oshman's robbery. In letters to journalists and advocates, he wrote with calm introspection, often reflecting on the choices that led him there. He expressed remorse, not only for the suffering of Officer Aubrey Hawkins' family, but for the series of decisions that turned a young man's life toward destruction. His tone was not of defiance but of acceptance mixed with regret. Garcia spent his final years reading philosophy and religion, communicating with pen pals and working through legal filings. In interviews he spoke about spiritual peace and his hope that people would one day understand the deeper complexity of the Texas 7 case, that desperation, fear and human error could turn even intelligent men into fugitives. But death row offers little redemption. The sounds of slamming cell doors, the echo of distant footsteps, and the slow march of years serve as reminders of a fate sealed long ago. As his execution date drew nearer, Garcia seemed resigned, speaking more about forgiveness and closure than about freedom. On the evening of December 4, 2018 at the Huntsville Unit, known grimly as the Walls Unit, Joseph Christopher Garcia was led from his holding cell to the death chamber, where Texas has carried out more executions than any other state in modern history. At 47 years old, Garcia's long legal battle had come to an end. Unlike executions of the past, Garcia did not receive a special last meal. In 2011, Texas abolished the long-standing tradition after an infamous incident in which a condemned inmate ordered an elaborate feast but refused to eat it. Since then, all inmates on death row receive a standard prison meal on the day of their execution. As witnesses gathered behind the glass, among them members of Officer Hawkins' family, reporters, and state officials, Garcia was strapped to the gurney. The sterile hum of machinery filled the room. His face appeared calm, his voice steady as he delivered his final statement. "I'd like to say to the family of Officer Hawkins, I know you probably hate me for what you think I did, but I didn't kill him. I wish you peace and closure. I'm ready." Those were the last words of a man who had spent nearly half his life behind bars, condemned under a law that punishes all involved, not just the one who pulls the trigger. Moments later, as the lethal dose of pentobarbital began to flow, Garcia exhaled deeply, his chest rising once, then falling still. At 6:43 p.m., Joseph Christopher Garcia was pronounced dead, the 12th inmate executed in Texas that year, and one of several from the Texas 7 whose fates had finally reached their end. Outside, a small group of protesters stood in silent vigil, candles flickering in the winter air, while across town, others expressed relief that justice had been served. And that brings us to the end of the haunting story of Joseph Christopher Garcia and the Texas 7. A case that still sparks debate about justice, accountability, and the very meaning of the law of parties in Texas. A single night changed countless lives, from a young officer's family left behind to 7 men whose choices sealed their fate forever. Now we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Joseph Garcia deserved the death penalty, even though he claimed he never pulled the trigger? Or should the law be re-examined when it comes to cases like this? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Share your opinions, your feelings, and your perspective on justice. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more haunting true crime stories from the heart of America's justice system. And remember to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep questioning what justice really means.